Welcome back to Mr. John Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining the family. Please hit the subscribe button so we can keep sharing inspiring stories like this with you on YouTube. The room was quiet enough for Kashia to hear her own heartbeat. She sat beside her husband's wheelchair, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the neurologist standing in front of her. She didn't expect anything unusual from this appointment. She only hoped for reassurance, maybe a small update, something to help her keep going after 5 exhausting years of caring for the man she loved. But what she heard next shattered the ground beneath her. "Mrs. Davis, I cannot find any medical reason your husband should be paralyzed." The air thinned. Kashia stared at Dr. Patel, waiting for him to correct himself or soften the statement, but he didn't. Keaton's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, knuckles going pale. For a moment, nobody moved. Kashia felt her throat tighten. Her mind raced back through every morning she lifted him from bed. Every night she stayed awake listening for him. Every tear she cried in private while telling herself she was strong enough to carry this burden. 5 years of worry, sacrifice, and hope swarmed her chest all at once. The doctor cleared his throat gently, unaware that his words had just split a life in half. "I know this is difficult to process, but based on your new scan and the strength in certain reflex responses, there is nothing here that explains total paralysis." Keshia blinked, feeling dizzy. Her voice refused to come out. She turned to Keaton, searching his face for confusion, shock, anything that matched what she was feeling. But all she saw was fear, a deep, heavy fear that didn't look new. Her heartbeat stumbled. Why did he look afraid of her? Before she could speak, Dr. Patel continued explaining the scan, but his words faded into the background. All Keshia could hear was that one sentence, echoing over and over. No medical reason. The life she thought she understood suddenly felt unfamiliar. Keshia's breath felt trapped in her chest. She'd spent half a decade giving everything she had, her time, her strength, her dreams, believing that the man she loved truly couldn't stand on his own. Anyone in her position would have done the same. When you love someone deeply, you don't question the weight you carry. You convince yourself you can handle it because walking away is never an option. She wondered quietly, have you ever given so much to someone that you forgot what it felt like to rest? Have you ever trusted a person so fully that the thought of doubt felt wrong? Most people understand sacrifice, but giving 5 years of your life to care for someone who can't walk, eat, or shower without your help, that level of devotion changes you. It shapes how you breathe and how you think. Kashia had lived that life every single day. Yet as she sat in that office, hearing the doctor say there was no medical reason for Keaton's paralysis, something inside her cracked. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to even imagine what those words could mean. Before she could gather her thoughts, the story jumps to a memory she hadn't yet processed. A stormy night, thunder shaking the house, the hallway dimly lit by flashes outside. Keshia grabbed a flashlight, calling for Keaton. She saw a tall figure shift near the bedroom door, a shape that shouldn't have been standing at all. Lightning flashed, bright and sharp. Keaton was upright, not in his wheelchair, not crawling, not supported by anything. He froze when he realized she saw him, then dropped to the floor as if trying to hide the truth with one sudden motion. Kashia remembered screaming his name, not out of fear, but out of confusion so heavy it stole the strength from her legs. Everything she thought she knew about her marriage started to slip. That stormy memory replayed in Keshia's mind like it refused to let her breathe. She didn't know what to believe anymore. 5 years of lifting, washing, feeding, and comforting a man she loved, and now she was questioning everything she ever thought was certain. If only Kashia had known the truth sooner. Maybe she wouldn't have worked herself to exhaustion. Maybe she wouldn't have sold precious belongings just to keep them afloat. This secret didn't just hurt her. It reshaped her entire life. And what she learned next would change everything. Before we go deeper, darling, if you're watching this on YouTube, please take a moment to like this video and comment where you're watching from. It truly helps the channel grow and allows us to share more powerful stories with people around the world. Thank you so much for supporting Mr. John Stories. Now, back to Keshia. After hearing the doctor's words and remembering that stormy night, something inside her shifted. The woman who once ignored every doubt was finally ready to face the truth she had been avoiding for years. She held onto her purse a little tighter and swallowed hard, steadying herself. The truth wasn't waiting in the past. It was waiting in the beginning, in the life she built with Keaton long before hospitals, wheelchairs, and late-night tears. To understand how she arrived at this moment, to understand why this revelation hurt so deeply. Back to the day she first met the man she believed she would spend the rest of her life with. And that is where our story begins. Keshia grew up in Miami Gardens, a place full of warm voices, strong families, and traditions that shaped the way she saw the world. Her earliest memories were of her mother playing old-school reggae on Saturday mornings while seasoning meat for the grill, and her father trimming the hedges outside their home with a rhythm only he understood. Their house sat on a quiet street where every neighbor knew one another, and where kids played in front yards until the streetlights came on. Her mother, whose roots traced back to Jamaica, filled the home with dishes that carried the comfort of her upbringing: jerk chicken, rice and peas, steamed cabbage. Keshia loved watching her mother cook. It was never just about food, it was about connection. Music, laughter, and stories surrounded every meal, creating an environment where love was expressed not only in words but in service. Those moments taught Keshia early what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. Sunday mornings belonged to church. The Baptist congregation they attended had been part of her family for generations. The choir's harmonies stirred something deep inside her, and the pastor's messages always emphasized love, unity, and perseverance. Keshia absorbed those lessons like oxygen. Even as she got older, she never saw church as an obligation. It was a sanctuary where she felt grounded and understood. Her school years reflected the same sense of community. Miami Gardens had a strong identity, one built on shared experiences and cultural pride. She attended local schools her entire life, and eventually enrolled at Florida Memorial University. Walking across that campus for the first time filled her with pride. FMU wasn't just a school to her. It represented legacy, progress, and possibility. She majored in education because she wanted to guide children the way her own teachers guided her. By 2005, she had become a teacher at a nearby elementary school. Her classroom was always lively, filled with colorful charts, handwritten notes of encouragement, and posters that represented the diverse backgrounds of her students. She believed deeply in showing every child that they mattered. She blended stories from her own culture into her lessons, not to lecture, but to spark curiosity. Her students adored her for it. Parents often thanked her for making learning feel personal and safe. Outside the classroom, Keshia was known for her heart. She volunteered for youth programs at her church, organized after-school tutoring sessions, and spent her weekends checking in on elderly neighbors. Loyalty was in her bones. Compassion was her second language. She understood the value of showing up for people, even when it wasn't convenient. That mindset would later shape much of her marriage, though she couldn't have known that yet. Her family saw her as the glue that held everyone together. If someone needed help moving, Keshia was there. If a cousin needed babysitting, she said yes before they even finished asking. She wasn't a pushover. She had a quiet strength that people respected, but she never hesitated to lend a hand. Her parents often told her she had an old soul, one that understood people in ways many adults didn't. During those years, she also built strong friendships. One in particular, Monique, had been close to her since high school. They bonded over shared dreams and similar values. Even when life pulled them in different directions, their connection never faded. Monique often teased Keshia, telling her she was wife material in every sense. Keshia laughed whenever she heard that, brushing it off as friendly banter. She wasn't in a rush to settle down. She wanted to build a life she could be proud of first. Keshia's heart was open, though. She prayed often for a partner who would appreciate her kindness, someone who understood the balance between giving and receiving. She didn't care about wealth or status. She wanted a teammate, a man who valued honesty, respect, and growth, a man she could laugh with, build with, and walk beside. By 30, she felt content. Her career was stable, her faith was steady, and her family was thriving. She enjoyed going to local events like Jazz in the Gardens, where she danced with her cousins under the Florida sun, soaking in music that felt familiar and comforting. Those festivals always reminded her how beautiful her community was, full of life, rhythm, and unity. She dreamed of someday having children of her own, children she could raise with the same values her parents instilled in her. But she wasn't desperate for it. She believed love would find her when the time was right. She trusted in divine timing, even when people asked why she wasn't married yet. What she didn't know was that her life would change at a community health fair, a day that felt ordinary at first, but would eventually shape her entire destiny. Life often shifts without warning, sometimes gently, other times with a force that takes your breath away. Keshia had no way of knowing that she was only months away from meeting a man who would captivate her heart completely, a man whose quiet smile and shy manner would draw her in long before she understood the journey ahead of them. Her resilience had been shaped by upbringing. Her compassion had been shaped by her community. Her loyalty had been shaped by her family. And all of those qualities would soon be tested in ways she could never anticipate. But for now, she was simply a woman living a full, purposeful life, unaware that love was already making its way toward her. While Keshia grew up surrounded by lively gatherings, Caribbean dishes, and the warm rhythm of Miami gardens, Keaton's childhood took place in a quiet Gulf Coast town, where life moved at a slower pace. His neighborhood was lined with tall oak trees draped in soft moss, and early mornings often carried the scent of the ocean drifting inland. The community was small, steady, and familiar, a place where neighbors waved from their porches and families rarely moved away. Keaton's father, a retired firefighter, carried himself with the kind of strength earned from years of dangerous work and long shifts. He wasn't loud or stern, but he believed in discipline, integrity, and doing the right thing even when no one was watching. His mother, a gentle and organized librarian, filled their home with books long before Keaton could read. She encouraged curiosity and patience, teaching him that problems could be solved if he remained calm and thoughtful. He was an only child, which meant he grew up with the undivided attention of two caring parents, but also with the pressure of meeting their expectations. His mother pushed him academically while his father pushed him physically. Summers were spent fishing at dawn, joining Little League baseball, or helping fix things around the house. By high school, Keaton had developed a strong build from sports and a disciplined work ethic from home. He wasn't the loudest or most popular kid at school, but he was well-liked. People saw him as dependable, the type who'd help carry heavy boxes for a teacher or stay behind to clean up after a team event. His calm personality sometimes made him seem reserved, but underneath it was a heart that cared deeply for people. He didn't show emotion easily, yet he felt things deeply when they mattered. After graduation, Keaton pursued physical therapy because he loved helping people recover their strength. He had seen his father deal with injuries from years on the job, and watching him push through recovery sparked something in him. He believed everyone deserved the chance to feel strong again. The way Keshia later devoted herself to caregiving felt familiar to him. Giving back was part of who he was. His career led him to Miami, far from the slower environment he knew. The city was bright, busy, and diverse in ways he had never experienced. When he accepted a job at a sports medicine clinic, his parents were proud but concerned. They worried he'd feel out of place in a city so different from his hometown. He reassured them he'd be fine, but deep down he wondered the same thing. Living in Miami Gardens was his first real experience being in the minority. With only a small percentage of white residents in the area, he often stood out more than he wanted to. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he found himself drawn to the community's warmth. Families looked out for one another. People greeted each other in grocery store aisles. Music and laughter spilled from backyards on weekends. It wasn't just lively. It felt genuine. Adjusting took time. He had to learn how to navigate new social environments, understand new cultural dynamics, and get used to being outside the comfort zone he grew up in. There were moments when he felt awkward or unsure of what to say, especially in large gatherings. But he never felt unwelcome. People appreciated his respectful nature and gentle demeanor. At work, he thrived. Athletes trusted him quickly because he had a natural ability to motivate without pushing too hard. His co-workers admired how patient he was with clients, especially those who felt discouraged by their injuries. He often stayed late to finish paperwork or to help a patient walk a little farther than they managed the week before. Being part of someone's healing journey reminded him why he chose this path. Though he liked Miami and his new job, he sometimes missed the quiet nights at home with his parents. He missed the open spaces and the slower pace. Yet a part of him knew he needed this distance. Moving forced him to grow, to step into his own life instead of living in the shadow of expectations. There was, however, a small insecurity he carried with him, one that had followed him since childhood. While he was physically capable and emotionally steady, he often questioned whether he was interesting enough or impressive enough. He worried that he might not stand out in a world full of louder personalities. That insecurity didn't dominate his life, but it lingered quietly beneath the surface, influencing how he behaved in unfamiliar settings. When he first arrived in Miami Gardens, the difference in environment amplified that insecurity. People around him had vibrant personalities, strong cultural identities, and deep community ties. He admired it, but he also felt unsure of his place. He wondered whether he belonged or whether he was simply passing through a world that wasn't meant for him. Yet life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One encounter can shift everything. One moment can open a door you didn't realize you were standing in front of. That moment for Keaton came at a community health fair, where he volunteered without expecting anything memorable to happen. What he didn't know was that his life was about to intertwine with a woman whose warmth and confidence would draw him in from the very first conversation. A woman who would later become the center of his world, shaping his future in ways he could never imagine, both beautiful and heartbreaking. The community health fair at Rolling Oaks Park was the kind of event Keshia always loved. Families gathered under wide tent canopies, local vendors handing out flyers, children darting between booths with painted faces. Miami Gardens came alive during events like this. It was a place where people greeted each other warmly and supported any program that uplifted the neighborhood. Keshia had been assigned a booth for her school, promoting healthy eating habits for children. She decorated her table with colorful charts and small snack samples, and even brought a stack of hand-drawn posters her students proudly created. The sun was blazing, and she used a folded pamphlet to fan herself between conversations with parents. A few tents away, Keaton volunteered at the injury screening station run by his clinic. It wasn't something he was required to do. He simply felt responsible for giving back to the community that had welcomed him. He wore a navy polo shirt with his clinic's logo and carried a clipboard, but kept wiping his brow as the heat pressed down harder. At one point, he noticed Keshia near her booth, laughing with a group of kids who hugged her before running off. Something about the brightness in her smile caught his attention. She looked confident, warm, and deeply connected to the people around her. He paused for a moment, unaware he was staring, and then shook himself back to reality. A little later, he walked past her booth and noticed how flushed she looked from the sun. Without overthinking, he stepped toward a cooler beside the screening tent, grabbed a cold water bottle, and approached her. "Hey," he said with a shy smile, extending the bottle. "You look like you could use this." Keshia turned, caught off guard, then let out a soft laugh. "Lord, you have no idea." "Thank you." She took the bottle and pressed it against her cheek for relief. "You're welcome," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm Keaton. I'm with the therapy tent down the way." "Keshia," she replied. "I'm with Parkway Elementary. My kids made half these posters." She gestured proudly to her display. He admired them and nodded. "They're great. Looks like you've got some talented artists." "Talented and messy," she joked. "They turned my classroom into a craft store explosion this week." Her quick humor eased his nerves instantly. Conversation flowed naturally, easy, light, and surprisingly comfortable. He told her about his work at the clinic and how he enjoyed helping people recover. She talked about teaching and why she loved working with children. Somewhere in between, she teased him lightly for looking too serious. "Keaton, you have a therapist face," she said, raising an eyebrow. "A therapist face?" he repeated, laughing. "What does that even mean?" "You know, calm, quiet, very professional. Like you're about to diagnose me for heat exhaustion." He chuckled. "I guess I walked right into that one." Before they parted ways, he hesitated, then asked if she would mind giving him her number. He expected her to decline politely. She seemed far out of his league, too vibrant for someone like him. But instead, She smiled and held up the water bottle he'd given her. "Since you saved my life with this," she said playfully, "I guess the least I can do is answer your call." The first few dates felt effortless. Their chemistry wasn't something they tried to build, it simply existed. Keaton took her to a Miami Dolphins game at Hard Rock Stadium, something she had never experienced before. She was amazed by the roar of the crowd, the sea of aqua and orange, and Keaton's excitement as he explained each play. At one point, after a touchdown, he lifted her slightly in celebration, then apologized for getting carried away. She only laughed and kissed his cheek. The next weekend, she introduced him to life on her side of town. Her church's summer cookout was buzzing with activity, music playing from portable speakers, aunties comparing recipes, cousins dancing under the shade. Keaton looked a bit overwhelmed at first, but her family welcomed him instantly. Her uncle challenged him to a game of dominoes, and Keshia sat beside him coaching him through every move. When he accidentally slammed a tile with too much enthusiasm, the table froze, then burst into laughter. Even Keaton laughed until his stomach ached. Moments like those bridged the gap between their backgrounds. Keshia loved watching him embrace her world with genuine effort, and he admired how confidently she navigated his quieter, more structured upbringing when he eventually introduced her to his parents. Their love grew in layers, not rushed, not forced. They took walks after work, exploring small parts of the neighborhood. They shared meals from local restaurants, comparing jerk chicken from different spots and debating which had the best seasoning. They attended art events, school functions, and even volunteered together at a charity run. Keaton appreciated how deeply Keshia cared for people. She brought out the best in him, making him more patient, more open, more confident. And she adored how gentle he was, how he listened, how he never tried to dim her light. A year later, he planned a proposal that matched her personality, joyful, community-centered, full of heart. During her school's talent show, her students lined up on stage holding signs that spelled out, "Will you marry me?" She gasped and turned around to find Keaton kneeling behind her, ring in hand, face flushed from nerves. Her answer was yes before he even finished asking. Their wedding took place in Miami Gardens beneath palm trees swaying lightly in the evening breeze. It was a celebration of two families, two cultures, and one love grounded in genuine connection. The reception was filled with music from both their backgrounds, R&B next to classic rock, and tables covered in dishes that represented both sides of their lives. After the wedding, they bought a small yellow house on a peaceful street. They decorated it together, blending their styles effortlessly. Dinner conversations were filled with plans for the future, children, vacations, dreams they wanted to explore. They had no idea how quickly life would test the vows they made. But for now, they were simply happy, deeply, truly happy, building a foundation strong enough to weather storms they couldn't yet see coming. The humidity that settled over Miami that August evening felt heavier than usual, the kind that clung to the skin even after sunset. Keaton was driving home later than planned, the sky clouding over in shades of deep gray as a storm gathered strength. He had texted Keshia an hour earlier saying he was wrapping up some last-minute paperwork at the clinic. She replied with a heart emoji and a promise that dinner would be waiting. Neither of them could have predicted how drastically life was about to shift. As Keaton merged onto I-95, the first drops of rain splattered against the windshield. He turned on the wipers, watching them swipe across the glass in restless motions. He was tired, much more than he realized, but the thought of getting home to Keshia kept him alert. Her smile, the warmth in her voice, the comfort he felt whenever he stepped through their front door, all of it urged him forward. The storm, however, seemed determined to slow him down. Within minutes, the drizzle escalated to a downpour. Traffic slowed. Cars splashed through water pooling on the lanes. Visibility dropped, and the night turned into a haze of headlights and reflections. Keaton gripped the steering wheel tighter, sitting more upright. "Come on, just a few more miles," he muttered under his breath. Then it happened. A small sedan in the opposite lane began drifting. Keaton noticed it first as a harmless swerve, something many drivers did in bad weather. But within seconds, its movements grew unpredictable. The car veered sharply, crossing the center line. The teenager inside, a boy barely old enough to drive, had fallen asleep behind the wheel. Keaton's heart lurched. He tried to steer away, but the wet road offered no grip. Tires screeched uselessly. Time felt distorted, stretched. The headlights of the sedan filled his vision, too bright, too close, before the violent impact exploded through both vehicles. Metal slammed against metal, glass shattered. The world tumbled. Keaton's car spun, rolling off the road into a ditch. The smell of gasoline mixed with the sting of powder from the deployed airbags. His ears rang, his body felt crushed, and for a moment he didn't know where he was or whether he was even alive. Pain shot through his back, sharp and unbearable, radiating downward like fire. He tried to move his legs. Nothing. No response, no feeling. He drifted in and out of consciousness, faint voices echoing from somewhere above him. Sirens grew louder. Paramedics arrived, cutting through the twisted metal to reach him. Flashlights reflected off his pale face as they worked quickly, speaking in urgent tones. "Pulse is weak. Stabilize him." Another voice. "Spinal precautions. Don't move his back." Keaton tried forming words, but only a rough gasp escaped. His vision blurred. The sky above him seemed to flicker as raindrops hit his face. He was lifted onto a stretcher, strapped carefully, and loaded into the ambulance. The ride to the hospital felt like a dream, one filled with lights, muffled voices, and the haunting fear that his body was failing him. Back at home, Keshia was sitting on the couch grading her students' reading assignments. She loved nights like this. Quiet, simple, filled with small routines that made her feel centered. A cup of tea rested beside her. She had planned to surprise Keaton with his favorite baked chicken. When her phone rang, she answered casually, expecting it to be him. "Is this Mrs. Davis?" The voice belonged to a nurse, gentle but urgent. In that instant, the room spun. Papers fell to the floor as she stood up quickly, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles paled. "Yes, this is she. What happened? Is Keaton okay?" "There's been an accident. He's alive, but his condition is serious. You need to come to the hospital immediately." Alive. Serious. Accident. The words thudded in her chest like blows. She didn't even remember grabbing her keys. She only remembered the frantic drive through the rain, her heart pounding with one loud cry, "Please, God. Please." When she rushed into the trauma unit, her breath caught. Keaton lay on a hospital bed surrounded by machines. His face was bruised, his head wrapped, his eyes half open but dazed. She ran to him, brushing aside a nurse's gentle warning. "Baby, I'm here," she whispered, tears already falling. Keaton blinked slowly, focusing on her voice. His hand twitched weakly as if trying to reach for her. A doctor entered the room, Dr. Nguyen, the neurologist on call. Her calm presence contrasted with the storm inside Keshia's chest. She spoke with careful clarity. "Mrs. Davis, your husband suffered a severe spinal injury. We performed emergency surgery to stabilize the vertebra. He survived a very dangerous crash." Keshia nodded rapidly, desperate for good news. Her hand remained clutching Keaton's. Dr. Nguyen inhaled softly before continuing. "But the damage to the spinal cord has affected all sensation and movement from the waist down. At this moment, he cannot move his legs. Long-term recovery is uncertain." The words dropped like stones. Keaton's face crumbled. A raw, agonizing sob escaped him. I can't feel anything," he whispered, voice breaking. Keshia leaned closer, her forehead touching his. "Listen to me," she said softly but firmly, forcing strength into her trembling voice. "You are alive. We will face this together. I'm not leaving you. Do you hear me? We'll get through this." He cried harder, clinging to her hand as if it were the only thing keeping him afloat. Machines beeped steadily around them. Nurses moved with practiced calmness. Rain continued tapping the windows, and in the middle of all that chaos, Keshia held Keaton like she was holding the last precious piece of her world. They had no idea how heavy the next years would become, or how much deeper the truth lay beneath this night. The first weeks after Keaton came home were a whirlwind of adjustments, physical, emotional, and financial. Their yellow single-story house in Miami Gardens, once a cozy space filled with laughter and easy routines, had to be reshaped for a new reality. Keshia took the lead without hesitation. She was exhausted, frightened, hopeful, overwhelmed, but determined. A contractor spent 2 days installing a sturdy metal ramp across the front steps. Keshia supervised every drill and measurement, wanting to make sure the slope wasn't too steep for Keaton's wheelchair. She cleared hallways, removed rugs that could catch the wheels, and rearranged furniture to create enough space for him to maneuver. The bathroom, however, became the biggest project. She used nearly all their savings to convert the small guest half-bath into a larger walk-in space with grab bars, a bench for the shower, and a handheld showerhead. When the modifications were complete, she looked around with a mix of pride and sadness. "This is our new home, baby," she whispered to herself. "We're going to make it work." The daily routine begins. Adjusting to their new life was harder than either of them expected. Each morning started before sunrise. Keshia would slip out of bed, stretch her stiff back, and go to Keaton's side. "Good morning, love," she'd whisper, lifting the blanket gently. Keaton would force a small smile. "Morning, Key." What followed became a ritual. She'd help him sit upright, brace herself, and guide his body from the bed into the wheelchair. Some days it went smoothly. Other days his weight would shift unexpectedly, nearly taking both of them down. Once, after catching him mid-fall, her back spasmed sharply. Keaton's face filled with guilt. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he murmured. Keshia pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Stop apologizing. We're a team. All right?" But even her encouraging words couldn't hide the strain she carried. From the bedroom she wheeled him into the bathroom. She assisted him through every intimate need, bathing, toileting, dressing, tasks she never imagined doing for the man she once danced with under stadium lights. Keaton often kept his eyes down, embarrassed. Keshia would try to ease the mood. "Baby, please. I've seen you in every condition. This is nothing new." He'd sometimes laugh weakly, easing the tension for both of them. The physical toll on Keshia. As weeks turned into months, the physical weight of caregiving took a toll. Her shoulders ached constantly. Her wrists felt swollen. Multiple times, while helping Keaton shift on the bed, she felt a sharp pull down her lower back that forced her to sit still for a moment, breathing through the pain. Late at night, when Keaton finally slept, she would slip into the bathroom and cry quietly into a towel. She never let him hear. She never wanted him to feel like a burden. She reminded herself constantly, "He needs me." He survived. That's what matters. Keshia did all the household tasks, cooking, cleaning, laundry, while also managing Keaton's medical supplies, daily medication schedules, and follow-up appointments. The exhaustion was real, but she hid it well. Emotional vulnerability between them. Their emotional connection wavered between closeness and heartache. Keaton battled waves of despair. Some days he would stare out the window, refusing to talk. Other days he'd break down, whispering, "You didn't marry this version of me. You deserve better." Keshia would kneel beside him, her hands on his cheeks. "Keaton Davis, don't you ever say that? I chose you. That hasn't changed." But deep down a quiet fear grew. What if things never get better? Still, she remained steady, determined to keep their marriage alive through the crushing weight of their new life. Intimacy in a new form. Romantic closeness changed, too. Their physical intimacy, which once came naturally, now carried complex emotions. The spinal injury affected Keaton's lower body function, making intimacy difficult. Their first attempt left both of them in tears, frustration for him, heartache for her. That night, Keshia curled beside him, holding his face. "We have more than one way to love each other," she whispered. They adapted. She'd lie in his arms, kiss his neck, run her fingers through his hair while he traced her jaw with his fingertips. The limitations forced them to discover a gentler intimacy, more emotional than physical, but still real. Still theirs. Sometimes they'd lie in bed reminiscing. "Remember our first Dolphins game?" Those memories felt like lifelines. Moments of humor amid the hardship. Though darkness hovered, they clung to small sparks of joy. Their sense of humor kept them sane. One afternoon, Keshia tied an oversized apron around Keaton and plopped a chef's hat on his head. "Chef Wheels at your service," she announced dramatically. Keaton burst out laughing. "Are you serious right now?" "Absolutely. Guide me through this recipe like you're on TV." They made a mess, flour on the counters, sauce splattered everywhere, but they laughed until their stomachs hurt. Another time, a telemarketer called about car insurance. Keaton answered and said, "Ma'am, unless you're insuring wheelchair rims, I think I'm good." Keshia nearly dropped the dish she was washing, laughing so hard she had to sit down. Even in hardship, they had moments where they felt like themselves again, moments that reminded them, love is still here. Despite the humor, the strain didn't disappear. Their marriage was entering a territory neither had been prepared for. And while Keaton's vulnerability seemed heartbreaking at the time, small shadows, barely noticeable, had already begun forming. Shadows Keshia would one day wish he hadn't ignored. The first year settled over their home like a long, heavy season, one that neither of them fully understood until they were deep inside it. Living with paralysis was nothing like the pamphlets or support articles described. The reality was more complicated, more draining, and far more isolating. Keshia's days were no longer her own. Her world rotated around schedules, medication times, stretching routines, repositioning every couple of hours, cooking, cleaning, transferring Keaton between the bed, the chair, and the bathroom. Teaching, her passion, her calling, was eventually pushed aside. Taking a leave from her classroom was meant to be temporary, but the days stretched into months, and the unpaid gap began to swallow their finances. Still, she told herself, this is marriage. Marriage means sacrifice, but sacrifice began to reshape her life in ways she never saw coming. Keshia's dreams quietly fade. Before the accident, she had dreams of becoming a school counselor one day. She wanted to earn her master's degree, inspire more kids, and bring new programs into her community. Those dreams evaporated as her days blurred into one long caregiving cycle. Money grew tight. Their savings had thinned after the home remodel and medical bills. Keshia sold personal items, jewelry from her mother, her grandfather's old coin collection, but never told Keaton. She didn't want him carrying guilt on top of everything else. Vacations, date nights, brunches with friends, those became distant memories. At first, she didn't mind. She needed to be there for him. But as the months went on, she noticed that she had stopped doing anything for herself entirely. Sometimes she'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back, tired eyes, tense shoulders, and a quiet sadness that settled in her expression. Sleepless nights become normal. Keaton couldn't stay in one position long. His body needed constant adjusting, and the anxiety that came with not being able to move freely made sleep difficult for him. "Kay, can you turn me again?" "It's okay. I'm awake," she'd murmur, even when she wasn't. It became normal for her to sleep in 2-hour fragments, her body jerking awake at the smallest sigh or shift from him. She'd rise, turn him, soothe him, help him with nighttime bathroom needs, then crawl back under the covers only to repeat the cycle. One night, around 3 a.m., she found herself crying silently while holding his hand. "You good?" Keaton whispered. She wiped her cheeks quickly. "Just tired." "I'm okay." He reached up to touch her face, his eyes filled with apology. "You shouldn't be doing this alone. I'm your wife," she whispered. "There's no one else I'd want doing this." But deep inside, she felt the growing weight of the truth. She was overwhelmed, and she was afraid to admit it to anyone. Monique tries to help. Monique, her closest friend, refused to let her disappear completely. She began checking in more regularly, showing up with takeout or insisting on taking her out for an hour or two. Keshia always hesitated. "I can't leave him for long," she'd protest. "He'll survive 2 hours," Monique insisted. Once, after much convincing, Monique treated Keshia to a spa session. Nothing fancy, just a simple massage and facial. For a brief moment, Keshia remembered what relaxation felt like. But as fate would have it, her phone rang halfway through. "Key." "I fell," Keaton said weakly. Monique saw the panic flash in her eyes. "Go," she said. Keshia rushed home, mind spinning with fear. She found him on the floor, shaken but unharmed aside from a bruise. She helped him up, checked him thoroughly, made sure he was okay. But something else happened that night. Keshia began to associate leaving the house with danger. From then on, she rarely allowed herself even the smallest break. The first subtle red flags. Amid the exhaustion, something else began to creep in. Small moments so quick, so subtle, She brushed them off every time. One day, while organizing the closet, a trophy slipped from her hands and fell hard onto Keaton's foot. Keaton flinched sharply and jerked his leg back. They both froze. He blinked, laughed nervously, and said, "Guess that was a reflex." Kashia accepted that explanation because she didn't have the emotional capacity to consider anything else. Another afternoon, she walked into the living room and found him sitting on the floor instead of in his wheelchair. "Oh my God, did you fall?" He hesitated, too long, before saying, "Yeah, I was reaching for the remote." She checked him over, expecting bruises or scratches, but saw nothing. Still, she smothered her doubt and helped him back into the chair. Late one night, she woke up to find him missing from the bed. Her heart pounded as she searched the house until she found him in the kitchen eating pie. He claimed he dragged himself there. But the distance from the bedroom to the kitchen was long. Really long. She glanced at his arms. No redness, no signs of strain, no heavy breathing. But again she let it go. It was easier to believe exhaustion was distorting her judgment than to entertain any darker possibility. Kashia's mind works against her. By the end of year 2, her world had shrunk so tightly around caregiving that she could no longer differentiate instinct from paranoia. She chalked everything up to, "I'm tired. I'm imagining things. He's trying to be independent. I'm overthinking." People in her support group mentioned caregiver burnout, but she didn't identify with it. She thought burnout meant giving up, and she never gave up, not on him. But the truth, the one she couldn't yet face, was this: her devotion had blinded her. Her exhaustion kept her from seeing what was right in front of her. The red flags had already appeared. The cracks were already forming. The pieces were already shifting. But Keshia had no idea she was walking toward a discovery that would destroy everything she believed about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Everything she was building her life around was already beginning to crumble beneath her feet. By the time year 3 settled in, Keshia felt like she had lived 5 lifetimes inside their small Miami Gardens home. Caregiving was no longer a routine she learned. It was a rhythm she survived. Her body moved through each day on instinct, but her spirit carried a heaviness she had never known. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had given away until small things began disappearing from her life. The hobbies she once loved, painting, journaling, volunteering at her church, had faded. She didn't even remember when she last sat with her mother over Sunday dinner, listening to family jokes and old reggae tunes. Life had narrowed so sharply around Keaton's needs that her own identity had become blurred. Some mornings, after helping Keaton through his first stretch, she'd stand in the bathroom staring at herself in the mirror. Her eyes had grown tired, her face thinner. She'd touch her own, cheek as if searching for the woman she used to be. But then Keaton would call her name, and she'd straighten her shoulders, put on a soft smile, and push everything aside. Burnout creeping in. People often talk about burnout as if it strikes suddenly, but for Keshia, it arrived quietly. It showed up in the way she sighed when folding laundry. Year 4 crept in with a strange, quiet tension that Keshia couldn't name. It wasn't a big moment or a dramatic shift. It was something softer, something that lived between her thoughts. Something that whispered questions she didn't want to ask. She kept brushing it off as exhaustion, lack of sleep, too much stress. But deep down her instincts were starting to stir. And it began with something as simple as dessert, the midnight pie incident. It was a little after 2 in the morning when Keshia woke up to an empty space beside her. Her hand brushed across cool sheets where Keaton should have been. Her heart jumped, panic, immediate and sharp. She rushed out of the bedroom, half expecting to find him on the floor, hurt, confused, calling her name. Instead, she found him in the kitchen. He wasn't in the wheelchair. He wasn't even near it. Keaton was sitting on the floor, leaning against a cabinet, holding a plate with a half-eaten slice of apple pie. The dim light from the stove hood cast just enough brightness for her to see him freeze mid-bite when she entered. "Keshia," he said quietly, startled. "Did I wake you?" She stood there for a moment, trying to process the scene. "No, I just noticed you were gone." "What happened? Why didn't you call me?" His eyes flicked to the wheelchair parked neatly by the bedroom door, far from where he was now. I dragged myself in here," he said. "Didn't want to bother you. I was hungry." Her eyes drifted across the floor. The distance from the bedroom to the kitchen was long, and the floor showed no scrape marks, no signs he had pulled himself with effort. For someone who struggled to shift positions in bed, the idea of him dragging himself across the house seemed impossible. But he looked embarrassed, vulnerable, hungry. She forced a smile. "Next time, just wake me. I'm serious." He nodded too quickly, almost grateful she didn't push the issue. But as she helped him into the wheelchair and back to bed, her chest buzzed with quiet confusion. Something didn't add up. She pushed the thought aside. "I'm tired. I'm reading too much into things." The neighbor's porch comment. A few days later, their neighbor Mrs. Johnson waved Keshia over while she was getting the mail. "You know," the older woman said casually, "I saw Keaton on your porch yesterday evening. Good to see him getting fresh air." Keshia blinked. "On the porch?" "Yes, dear. Standing by the railing for a moment, maybe stretching?" Standing, a word that hit too hard. Her throat tightened. That couldn't have been him." "Oh." The woman laughed a little. "Well, these eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be. Maybe I mixed him up with somebody else." "Ignore me." Keshia forced a smile, but her stomach twisted. She replayed the woman's words all day, telling herself, maybe someone walked across their porch. Maybe the neighbor was confused. Maybe shadow light distorted things. Her mind offered excuses faster than she could question them. When she got home, she checked Keaton for any changes. New tension in his legs, new bruises, new soreness. Nothing. It should have eased her mind, but instead it left her feeling strangely off balance. Keaton's subtle defensiveness. That night, Keaton was quieter than usual. His shoulders were tense, and he avoided eye contact during dinner. When she asked if everything was okay, he shrugged, brushing her off gently. "I'm fine, Key," he said, poking at his food. Something about his tone was guarded. She tried again. "If you're hurting or something feels wrong, you have to tell me." He paused, his fork hovering over the plate. "I said I'm fine." His voice wasn't loud or harsh, but it had an edge she rarely heard. It stung. She sat back slightly. "Okay." That was when she noticed a faint tremble in his hands, something like nerves, or fear, or something he didn't want to say out loud. That night, when she helped him into bed, she wondered why his mind seemed far away from her, like he was carrying a secret weight she wasn't allowed to touch. Keshia rationalizes everything. Her mind tried to make sense of the shifts, connecting dots that she immediately erased. Tiredness can cause strange behavior. Depression changes people. Maybe his nerves are acting up. Maybe the neighbor really was confused. She clung to these explanations like lifelines because the alternative was unthinkable. She loved him too much to imagine he might be hiding something. And yet, the whisper in her gut kept growing louder. Late-night Google searches. One night, unable to sleep, she opened her laptop and typed something she never thought she'd search in her life. Can someone with paralysis regain movement after years? She read articles, medical forums, personal stories. Some were hopeful. Most said improvement tended to appear early, not after several years. She closed the tabs quickly, but her fingers hovered again. A darker question pressed itself into her thoughts. She hesitated. Then she typed, "Can a person pretend to be paralyzed?" Her stomach sank as she read. Comments, confessions, real cases. Her hands shook so much she slammed the laptop shut. "No," she whispered to herself. "No, not Keaton, not my husband." She pressed her hands to her face, breathing through the panic rising in her chest. The idea felt cruel, wrong, something only a cold person would even consider. They waited. Keshia tried desperately to silence them, telling herself she was simply overwhelmed. Yet something inside her knew. These weren't random questions. These weren't meaningless coincidences. These weren't harmless moments. Something in her marriage was shifting beneath the surface, and a truth she wasn't ready to face was already reaching for her. The questions had been slowly gathering inside Keshia's mind, quiet, unwelcome thoughts she fought against every day. But nothing could have prepared her for the night those hidden doubts clawed their way into reality. It happened during one of Miami's summer storms. the kind where thunder cracked like the sky was tearing open. Heavy rain pounded the roof, rattling the windows, and lightning flashed so brightly it lit the entire house in bursts. Kashia had just finished placing candles around the living room. The storm was strong enough to knock out power in their neighborhood before, and she wanted to stay ahead of it. Keaton was resting in their bedroom, dozing lightly while she checked on the emergency flashlight. The next flash of lightning struck so violently that the entire house trembled, followed immediately by a sudden blackout. The lights died, the humming appliances fell silent, and the only sound left was the storm's roar. "Keaton!" she called, instinctively. No response. Her heart skipped. She grabbed the flashlight and hurried down the hallway toward the bedroom. What she saw next would shake her to her core. The silhouette. A bright streak of lightning lit the hallway again, revealing a tall shape standing just ahead. Standing. Her breath caught so sharply she almost dropped the flashlight. "Keaton?" she whispered. The silhouette flinched, and suddenly collapsed with a loud thud. The sound echoed brutally in the dark hallway. Kashia's hands trembled as she rushed forward and shined the flashlight. There he was, face down, body sprawled across the floor. His wheelchair was nearby, but not close enough for him to have simply slipped out. Her heart raced so hard it hurt. "Oh my God, baby. Are you hurt? What happened?" Her voice cracked as she knelt beside him. But the more she helped him shift, the more something felt wrong. His arms were bracing against the floor with controlled strength, far too controlled. His hands pressed against the tiles, catching his own weight. And when she attempted to roll him toward her, she felt the subtle, but unmistakable, push of his body helping the movement. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. He was helping her, without thinking, without hesitation. That wasn't possible. Not for someone who couldn't move below the waist. A bolt of fear shot through her chest. Still, she forced herself to stay calm, to move slowly, to act like nothing felt strange. "Let's get you up, okay?" she said softly. "Yeah," he breathed. Together, though she felt him doing almost half the work, she brought him onto her lap and then maneuvered him back into the wheelchair. Her hands never stopped trembling. An unsettling realization. Once he was settled, Keshia kept her movements steady, her face neutral. She didn't want him to see the storm inside her. "Let's go back to the bedroom," she said quietly. He nodded quickly, eyes avoiding hers. When the power flickered back on a few minutes later, Keshia sat beside the bed, staring at him while he stared at the ceiling. She replayed the scene over and over in her head. The silhouette, upright, the collapse, too delayed, his body moving too naturally. His arms, steady, confident, coordinated. Every detail clashed violently with the man she had cared for day after day, year after year. The truth crept in like an unwelcome guest. He was moving in ways he shouldn't be able to. But she couldn't let herself believe it. Not fully. Not yet. She swallowed hard and asked gently, "Keaton, are you sure nothing feels different lately? Any tingles? Any sensations? Anything at all?" "No," he said firmly. "Nothing's changed." His tone was too sharp. Too defensive. Too rehearsed. She tried again, keeping her voice steady. "Baby, it's been years since we had a full evaluation. Maybe it's time we visit a specialist, just to see if—" "No," he cut in suddenly. It wasn't just a refusal. His voice snapped like a door slamming shut. Keshia blinked, startled. "Why not?" "I said no." His chest rose and fell quickly, agitation pulsing through him. "I'm tired of tests. I'm tired of doctors. I don't want to do this anymore." She stared at him, stunned by his sudden anger. "I'm not saying we push you into anything. But don't you think we should at least—" "No, Keshia." He looked away, jaw tight. "Drop it." Her breath faltered. Keaton had never spoken to her like that, not once in their entire relationship. He had always been the calm one, the steady one. Yet now, his voice carried something she had never heard before. Distress mixed with something else she couldn't name. Real fear, not of the paralysis, but of something being discovered. Her chest tightened even more. She lowered her voice carefully. "I'm just trying to help you." He didn't even look at her. He simply stared forward, shoulders tense, eyes distant, like someone guarding a secret he was terrified might slip out. the first cracks in her trust. That night, Kashia lay awake long after Keaton fell asleep. She watched him breathe. She listened to the storm outside finally quieting, and she tried to force her mind to settle, but she couldn't. Every instinct inside her screamed that something was deeply wrong. Not just with Keaton's body, but with the truth he was holding. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel like she was looking at her husband. She felt like she was looking at a stranger she loved, a stranger she cared for, a stranger she had sacrificed years for, but a stranger who might not be telling her everything. And that thought, that tiny, quiet thought, was the beginning of the truth she could no longer avoid. The morning of the appointment felt unusually still, as if the world was holding its breath. Kashia didn't sleep much the night before, replaying the storm scene in her mind, until dawn seeped through the curtains. She moved around the house quietly, packing Keaton's essentials: water, medication, extra pads, trying to steady her hand so he wouldn't see how tightly her nerves were clinging to her. Keaton sat in his wheelchair near the window, staring outside like he was searching for an escape route. His jaw twitched every now and then, a small tell Keshia had learned to recognize over the years. He was anxious, or angry, or both. "Ready?" she asked gently. He nodded without looking at her. "Yeah." The drive to the spinal center near Broward was completely silent. Normally, she filled the car with soft R&B or gospel, humming lightly to ease his anxiety. Today, she kept the radio off. The quiet felt safer, less likely to trigger another outburst. Rain from last night still clung to the edges of the road. Puddles reflected the morning light as they passed through traffic. Kashia stole glances at Keaton whenever she could. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles pale. When they arrived at the center, automatic doors slid open with a soft sigh, revealing the familiar sterile scent mixed with the faint smell of coffee. A few patients waited in wheelchairs, some accompanied by family, others alone. Keshia pushed Keaton inside, her heart beating so hard she feared he could hear it. A receptionist greeted them with a polite smile. "Good morning. Checking in?" "Yes, for Keaton Davis." Keshia spoke before Keaton could respond. "Please have a seat. Dr. Patel will call you shortly." They moved to the waiting area. Keaton sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. Keshia sat beside him, hands folded, knee bouncing. She wanted to reach for his hand, but something stopped her. Uncertainty, maybe. Pain. A shifting distance she didn't yet know how to navigate. Minutes passed like hours until the door finally opened. "Mr. Davis?" a voice called. Both of them looked up. Dr. Patel stood there, a calm, composed man in his late 40s. His tone carried the kind of measured patience that came from years of dealing with complicated spinal cases. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Let's get started." Inside the examination room. Once inside, Keshia helped Keaton transfer to the exam table. The doctor watched with a thoughtful expression, not pitying, but observant in a way that made her chest tighten. "So," Dr. Patel began, opening Keaton's file, "I've reviewed your history. Severe spinal trauma, surgery to stabilize the vertebra, long-term loss of lower body function. No significant improvement reported over the past few years." "Correct," Keaton said quietly. Keshia nodded. "All right," the doctor continued. "I'd like to run a few tests before reviewing your MRI." He began with sensory checks. He touched different areas along Keaton's legs with a tool. "Tell me if you feel pressure." "No," Keaton replied. The doctor didn't respond. He simply wrote something down. Next came reflex testing. He tapped below Keaton's kneecap. For years, those taps produced nothing. Today, something happened. A flicker. A tiny, barely perceptible twitch. Keshia saw it. Dr. Patel saw it. Keaton froze. The doctor didn't react outwardly. He simply repeated the test. Another tiny twitch. Keshia's breath caught. Her heart hammered. She felt her palms begin to sweat. Dr. Patel nodded slowly and stood upright. "All right, Mr. Davis," he said gently. "Let's move on to the imaging, the MRI findings." They rolled into the imaging review room, where a large screen displayed Keaton's spinal scans. Dr. Patel pulled up new and old images side by side. From what I can see, he began, in a tone that immediately tightened Keshia's chest, the initial injury caused severe trauma. That part is true. The word hung in the room like heavy fog. Dr. Patel zoomed in on a section of the newer scan. This, he continued, pointing to a clean segment of the spinal cord, shows fully healed tissue. No compression. No nerve damage pressing on the cord. Structurally, your spine shows no reason for paralysis at this stage. Keshia blinked. Her throat turned dry. She whispered, I don't understand. Dr. Patel faced them fully, choosing his words with care. Mrs. Davis, based on this MRI and the reflex activity we just observed, there is no current medical explanation for why your husband cannot move his legs. Keaton let out a shaky breath. Keshia stared at the doctor, stunned. Her heartbeat slowed, then quickened. Her stomach clenched violently. You're saying, she whispered, he should be able to move? The doctor gave a slow, gentle nod. From a medical standpoint, yes. Silence. A deep, trembling silence. Keshia turned to Keaton, who suddenly looked much smaller than the man she married. His eyes were watering, his chest rising unevenly. Keaton? She whispered. He shook his head, voice cracking as he whispered. I don't know what to say, but she saw it. The fear, the guilt, the truth. She felt her world tilt, felt a coldness bloom inside her chest where love used to sit untouched, had been living behind a wall of secrets. And now that wall had finally cracked open. Keshia's breath trembled, her hands shook, her heart began to break. The ride home from the spinal center felt like a hollow stretch of time she wasn't sure how she survived. Keshia didn't remember pulling out of the parking lot. She didn't remember the highway. She didn't remember the turns leading back into Miami Gardens. Her body drove, but her mind floated somewhere outside of itself, numb, shocked, trembling. Keaton sat beside her, silent the entire drive. Not one word, not one explanation, not one attempt to comfort her. By the time they pulled into their driveway, her emotions were fighting for air beneath the crushing weight of disbelief. She helped him inside the house in complete silence. When she pushed him into the living room, he suddenly grabbed the wheels of his chair, stopping himself abruptly. His shoulders shook. Keshia, he whispered, voice breaking on her name. She froze. She wasn't ready. She didn't want to hear what was coming. But she knew this moment had been waiting years to erupt. He pressed his hands to his face and let out a sound she had never heard before, a painful mix between a sob and a confession tearing itself free. I'm sorry, he cried. I'm so sorry. Keshia swallowed hard. Keaton, tell me the truth. He didn't answer right away. He cried harder, shoulders trembling, chest heaving. It took him almost a full minute before he could finally speak. The confession begins. When the accident happened, he began shakily. The paralysis was real. I swear it was real at first. Keshia wrapped her arms around herself, bracing for impact. Those first months, I had nothing. No feeling. No movement. I thought I'd never walk again. That part wasn't a lie. She nodded faintly, eyes filling against her will. But then, things started changing. Keshia's heart cracked. I didn't tell you, he whispered, because I was scared it was nothing. I didn't want to give you false hope. You were doing everything for me, and I didn't want to disappoint you if it was just nerves firing randomly. Keshia shook her head slowly. You should have told me anyway, Keaton. I know, he said, but I didn't. His voice dropped, and then I felt more. A little strength in my knee, a tingle down my leg. Small things, slow things, but things I couldn't deny. She felt her pulse beating painfully in her throat. So why didn't you say something? She whispered. Keaton's chest caved inward emotionally. Because that's when the fear took over. Fear, ego, and the downward spiral. When you were taking care of me, he said, voice trembling, you were incredible. You were strong. You were calm. You were everything I wasn't. He swallowed hard. You didn't resent me. You didn't complain. You just loved me through it. And that scared me. Kashia frowned, confused. How could my love scare you? Because I didn't feel worthy of it, he cried. You were doing everything, and I felt small, useless, weak, every time I saw you lifting me, holding me, bathing me. I hated myself a little more. Kashia felt a tear slip down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. One night, he continued, I tried to stand when you were asleep. I could get halfway up before my legs shook. It scared me. But it also proved something. He exhaled shakily, that my body was healing. Slowly, but healing. She held her breath. And instead of telling you, he whispered, I hid it. Why? She breathed. He lifted his tear-soaked face toward her. Because the moment I realized I might walk again, all I could think about was losing you. Keshia blinked, stunned. You were my protector, he said. My everything. And deep down, I was terrified that if I didn't need you anymore, you wouldn't need me. Keshia stepped back as if the words slapped her. That's not, Keaton, that's not how marriage works. I know, he cried. But my brain wasn't right. I was depressed, lost, ashamed. I didn't want to be a burden, but I didn't know how to go back to being your equal either. I was scared I wouldn't measure up. He shook his head hard. So instead of healing with you, I chose to hide. Every day, every twitch, every step I practiced when you weren't home. Every improvement I pretended I didn't feel. A sob tore out of her chest. It got worse, he continued, voice breaking. The longer I hid it, the harder it became to tell you. I kept thinking, I'll tell her tomorrow, next week, next month. But I never did. And then it turned into years. He covered his face again. By then, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to confess. I didn't know how to be honest without losing you entirely. Kashia's hands trembled violently. So you let me care for you, she said quietly, day after day, year after year, even when you knew you were healing. I didn't want to lose you, he whispered. You lost me the moment you lied, she said, voice cracking. Kashia's heart breaks open. She sank onto the couch, her body shaking. The truth felt like a blade slicing through 5 solid years of sacrifice. Her love, her labor, her dreams, all built on something she didn't know was collapsing underneath her. Keaton rolled toward her, hands shaking. Kashia, please don't look at me like that. She lifted her eyes. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered. He began sobbing again, reaching for her hand, but she pulled it away. Her wedding ring glinted, suddenly feeling heavier than it ever had before. The man she married, the man she nurtured, the man she fought for, had been living a lie, and the truth was now too big to ignore. The storm returned the following evening, almost as if the sky itself understood the collapse happening inside their home. Heavy rain washed over Miami Gardens, drowning the streets in steady sheets of water. Thunder rolled like distant grief. The house, usually warm, usually full of their familiar rhythms, felt silent and hollow. Kashia stood in the living room for a long time, her hands gripping the back of the couch as she struggled to breathe. Sleep had not touched her. Food had no taste. The confession replayed in her mind endlessly, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. Across the room, Keaton sat in his wheelchair, watching her with eyes swollen from hours of crying. He had barely slept too. His hands shook every time he tried to speak, but Keshia hadn't been ready to hear anything more from him. Not yet. But tonight, she needed to say what she had swallowed for years. Keshia, he whispered, voice trembling. Please sit with me. Thunder boomed above them. A flash of bright light filled the room. Finally, she turned to him. Her voice was steady, but her expression was soaked in heartbreak. 5 years, Keaton. 5 years of carrying everything alone. 5 years of lifting you, bathing you, turning you, feeding you, crying by myself while I tried to be strong. 5 years of praying for a miracle that was already happening behind my back. His chin quivered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She stepped closer, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. You let me break my body for you, my dreams, my career, my family time, my health, my peace. You let me sacrifice everything while you healed in the dark. He dropped his face into his hands, sobbing. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you chose a lie over our marriage. Her words hit him harder than the lightning that cracked outside. He tries to stand, and she sees everything. Something shifted suddenly inside him. Panic, desperation, the need to prove something too late. He grabbed the arms of his wheelchair. Keshia, look at me, he choked out. She frowned. Keaton, don't. Before she could reach him, he pushed himself upward. His legs trembled beneath him, but they held. Slowly, unsteadily, painfully, but undeniably, Keaton stood. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his body in a stark, heartbreaking glow. Keshia's hand flew to her mouth as a sob tore from her throat. He stood tall, broken, shaking, devastated, but standing nonetheless. Please, he whispered, taking one slow step toward her. Please don't leave me. Another step. His breath shaky. Tears streaming. I love you, he cried. I only lied because I didn't know how to go back to the man you deserved. Keshia staggered backward, overwhelmed by the sight. The man she thought she knew, the man she devoted herself to, was peeling apart in front of her, exposing every flaw, every insecurity, every ounce of his hidden truth. Her heart felt ripped open. Stop, she whispered. Just stop. But he continued moving forward as if walking toward her could erase the years lost. If I could take it back, every lie, every fear, I would, he pleaded. You're my whole world. Please, please don't. Keshia held up her hand, stopping him mid-step. Don't come any closer. He froze. The storm surged louder outside, almost swallowing her next words. Her emotional collapse. Keshia sank onto the couch, covering her face with both hands. Sobs burst out of her, uncontrollable and painful. Her body shook with the force of everything she had held inside for years. Hurt, betrayal, exhaustion, shattered trust. Why? She cried. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? Why didn't you let me love you through healing? Why did you let me break myself thinking you'd never get better? Keaton knelt shakily. The first time in years she had seen him drop to the floor under his own strength. I didn't want to disappoint you, he whispered. I didn't know how to be the man you married. You could have talked to me, she sobbed. We could have faced it together. I know, he whispered, tears falling onto the carpet. I know I failed you. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a man drowning in his own self-inflicted guilt. A man who loved her, but didn't love himself enough to tell her the truth. A man who let fear control him until it destroyed everything they built. Something inside her cracked completely. Keshia reached for her necklace, the simple gold chain he gave her on their wedding day. Her fingers shook as she unclasped it. For years, it never left her neck. Not once. She held it in her palm, staring at it through watery eyes. Keshia, please don't, Keaton whispered, voice breaking. She closed her hand around it tightly. This was my promise to you, she said quietly. A promise you broke long before I realized. She placed the necklace on the coffee table. I can't stay here, she whispered. Keaton's face collapsed. No, please, don't leave. Please, I'll do anything. I'll get help. We can go to counseling. I'll tell everyone the truth. Thunder shook the house again, drowning his words. Keshia stood, trembling but resolute, driving away into the storm. She grabbed her keys, her purse. Nothing else. Keaton dragged himself toward her on his knees, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe. "Keshia," he choked out. "Please, don't walk out that door." She turned back one last time, tears streaking down her face. "I already stayed longer than you were honest." With those final words, she stepped outside. Rain soaked her instantly, but she didn't stop. She walked to her car, heart tearing with every step. She climbed inside, hands shaking, and turned the engine on. Through the rain-blurred window, she saw Keaton collapse onto the floor inside the house. Broken, reaching, desperate. But it was too late. She pulled out of the driveway, the storm swallowing her car as she drove away from the man she once believed she'd spend forever with. And for the first time in years, she chose herself. The first days after leaving Keaton felt nothing like freedom. They felt like falling. Keshia cried in her car for nearly an hour that night before finally driving to her sister's home in Miami Gardens. The rain blurred the windshield as she pulled into the driveway, hands trembling so hard she could barely shift the gear into park. Her sister rushed out immediately, wrapping her in a tight embrace before Keshia could form a single word. "You don't have to explain a thing tonight," she whispered. "Just come inside." It was the first moment in years that Keshia felt held instead of holding someone else. Inside, her family gathered around her, her mother, her sister, 2 cousins who rushed over as soon as they heard. They didn't ask for details. They didn't press. They simply offered presence. Blankets, hot tea, quiet support. For the first time in years, she slept an entire night without interruptions. The weight slowly lifts. The next morning, sunlight caught her off guard. She wasn't used to waking up rested, without the instinct to jump up for medication schedules, bathroom transfers, or morning routines. She lay still for a moment, letting that unfamiliar peace settle into her bones. But then reality returned. 5 years of deception, 5 years of labor, 5 years of carrying a life built on half-truths. The pain sharpened again, but this time, she wasn't alone with it. Her mother sat beside her at breakfast, placing a gentle hand on her back. "You're going to get through this," she said softly. "One day at a time." Her sister chimed in, "And we're not letting you do it by yourself." Keshia's eyes filled, but she nodded. They meant it. She could feel it. Monique steps in. Later that afternoon, Monique arrived, barging through the door with a bag of snacks, a notebook, and that fierce protective energy Keshia had always leaned on. "I should have known something was wrong," Monique said, pulling her into a long hug. "I should have pushed harder." "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," Keshia whispered. "I kept everything inside." Monique cupped her face gently. "You don't have to do that anymore." They sat on the couch together, and for the first time, Keshia said out loud all the things she had carried alone, the exhaustion, the doubts, the guilt, the fear, the small, suspicious moments she ignored, and the heartbreak of learning the truth. Monique squeezed her hand. "You were surviving. That's what you were doing. Now it's time for you to live again." Those words sank deep, reporting the fraud. A week later, after speaking with a legal advisor and her therapist, Keshia made one of the hardest decisions of her life. She reported the years of misinformation to the necessary authorities. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was accountability. For her future. For every year she had given without knowing the truth. She filled out paperwork, documented timelines, forwarded medical results, and provided statements. The process was emotionally brutal, but her therapist reassured her. "You're not punishing him. You're reclaiming yourself." Keshia repeated those words like a prayer. Starting therapy, learning to breathe again. Therapy became the anchor she didn't know she needed. Her therapist, Dr. Lewis, listened without judgment, helping her sort through the layers of betrayal. "Keshia," she said one morning, "you didn't just lose a marriage. You lost years of your identity. Now you have space to rediscover who you were before you became a caregiver." It struck her deeply. She had forgotten that version of herself, the bright, hopeful teacher, the community volunteer, the girl who laughed easily, the woman who had dreams beyond survival. Therapy helped her grieve the life she gave away, but also helped her see the life she could build now. Returning to work. 2 months later, she felt strong enough to return to the classroom. Walking through the gates of the school brought tears to her eyes. The smell of crayons, the buzz of students, the greeting from colleagues, all of it wrapped her like a warm, familiar blanket. Her principal hugged her tightly. "We missed you." The students welcomed her back with a handmade banner. "We love you, Ms. Moore." Seeing her maiden name written so boldly made her chest tighten, but in a hopeful way. She wasn't just reclaiming her job, she was reclaiming herself. Each morning she woke up excited again, not drained. She decorated her classroom with bright colors, restarted her reading circle, and found joy in small moments she'd forgotten she loved. Teaching wasn't just her job, it was her calling. And being back reminded her she still had purpose beyond pain. Journaling, a new habit. Her therapist suggested journaling as a way to process everything. At first, Keshia wasn't sure she'd stick with it, but once she started, the words poured out. She wrote about her heartbreak, her healing, her fears, her rediscovery, her hopes. The journal became a safe place, a home for thought she'd buried for years. One evening she wrote, "I am learning to breathe again, without guilt. I am learning to stand again without carrying someone else's weight. I am learning to love myself the way I loved him." She closed the journal gently, feeling lighter, finding identity again. Bit by bit, her life began to expand. She rejoined her church choir. She visited local parks. She took Saturday walks at Bayside with her cousins. She cooked meals just for herself, meals she enjoyed, not meals that fit someone else's diet. She looked in mirrors and saw a woman emerging piece by piece, stronger, wiser, still tender, but no longer lost. She was becoming Keshia again, not the caregiver, not the wife of a man who lied, not the woman stuck in survival mode, just Keshia. And for the first time in years, she whispered to herself, "I deserve a life where I am whole." In the months that followed Keshia's departure, life moved in two completely different directions for her and Keaton. While she worked tirelessly to rebuild her identity, he found himself forced to face a reality he had avoided for far too long, one where excuses, hiding, and emotional dependence could no longer protect him. The investigation into the deception took time, but eventually, Keshia received an official notice, one confirming that the authorities were moving forward with action based on the medical evidence, the financial statements, and the years of support he had received under false pretenses. She read the letter at her mother's kitchen table, hand steady, but breath shallow. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. Accountability wasn't something she wished on him. It was simply what needed to happen. Keaton's legal and community consequences. Keaton wasn't sent to prison. His case was more complicated than that. His initial paralysis had been real, and the courts acknowledged that. But the later deception carried weight. Instead of jail time, he received community service at a rehabilitation center. Mandatory counseling, required restitution payments spread over several years, loss of certain financial benefits he had been receiving. The outcome was firm but fair, focused on repair rather than destruction. For months, he spent his days assisting at a rehab center near Coral Springs, surrounded by people genuinely fighting to regain the abilities he had hidden, folding towels, cleaning equipment, organizing supplies, listening to patients describe progress he once feared. The work humbled him. One afternoon, while helping a patient with mobility bands, Keaton's counselor approached him quietly. "You know," she said, "healing doesn't always look like standing up. Sometimes it looks like admitting the weight you've put on others." He swallowed hard. "I hurt her," he whispered. "I hurt the only person who ever loved me without conditions." "You can't change what happened," she replied, "but you can choose who you become after." He carried those words home like a bruise. The letter, 2 months into his community service, Keshia received a neatly folded envelope in her mailbox with familiar handwriting. Her heart tightened the moment she saw it. She sat on her bed, staring at it for nearly 10 minutes before finally opening it. Inside was a single letter, long, honest, and raw. Keshia, there are no words that can erase what I did, but I need you to know something I couldn't say out loud when you were standing in front of me. He went on to confess not just the timeline of his lies, but the why behind them. His fear of inadequacy, his worsening self-esteem, his loneliness masked as dependence, and the way guilt slowly transformed into avoidance. You saved me during the hardest moment of my life, but I never gave you a chance to save me the right way. I held on to the broken version of myself because I believed it was the only way you wouldn't leave. I never considered that I was breaking you in the process. Keshia wiped her eyes but continued reading. I'm getting help now. Real help. Not for us, because I know I lost that, but for me. I want to become someone who would have been worthy of you. Someone who doesn't hide behind fear. Someone who doesn't confuse love with dependency. You deserved better than the version of me you got. And I hope one day you find peace that doesn't involve carrying anyone's weight but your own. He signed it simply. Keaton. Keshia folded the letter carefully, placed it in her journal, and closed her eyes. It didn't undo what happened. It didn't rebuild anything. But it gave her a quiet, needed closure, a final understanding. Dr. Patel's encouragement. A few weeks later, she visited the spinal center for a follow-up on her statement. When she walked into the lobby, she unexpectedly crossed paths with Dr. Patel. He offered a gentle, respectful nod. Mrs. Moore, how are you holding up? She paused, then answered honestly. Trying. Healing. One day at a time. He gave her a sincere smile. You showed tremendous courage. Most people would have ignored the signs or continued suffering in silence. Your strength is rare. His words anchored her. She didn't always feel strong, but hearing it reminded her that she had survived something many never speak about. Thank you, she whispered. Filing for divorce. The legal paperwork had been sitting on her desk for weeks. Every time she walked past it, something in her chest would tighten, the finality, the grief, the memories. But she also felt a quiet strength every time she looked at those papers. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Keshia sat down at the table with a pen in her hand. She inhaled deeply, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, I'm choosing me. She signed her name. When the court date came, Keaton didn't contest anything. He appeared via remote screen, quieter and thinner than before. Their eyes met briefly, long enough for both of them to feel the ache of what once was. But neither attempted to reach for the past. The judge spoke a few formal sentences, stamped a file, and with that, the marriage was officially dissolved. Keshia exhaled slowly. Her chapter with him had closed, reclaiming her maiden name. She decided to restore her maiden name, Moore, not as a rejection of her memories, but as a celebration of her new beginning. The first time she signed it on a school document, she felt something bloom inside her. Pride, strength, clarity. She was herself again. The caregiver blog. Healing came with reflection. Over time, Keshia's therapist encouraged her to share her story. Not the private pain, but the lessons that could help others. So she created a blog, Care for the Caregiver. She wrote about burnout, about boundaries, about identity, about signs she wished she recognized sooner, about the importance of asking for help. Her writing was gentle, sincere, and deeply human. Within weeks, her posts gained traction. Messages poured in from people who had lived different versions of the same story. People who felt seen because she dared to say the things they were too ashamed to voice. Each comment reminded her. Her story had purpose. Her pain had transformed into guidance. Her voice mattered again. Keshia was healing. Not perfectly, not quickly, but truthfully. And that was enough. The year after leaving Keaton was the longest and slowest of Keshia's life. Healing didn't come in a straight line, And it didn't come with dramatic breakthroughs. It came quietly, through small choices, gentle routines, honest conversations, and moments where she allowed herself to feel joy without guilt. She had finally reached a place where her past no longer defined her present, and her future no longer felt like something she needed permission to imagine. The Tree to Planting event. One bright morning in late spring, her school organized a tree planting event at a community park in Miami Gardens. It was the same park where she used to organize nutrition booths for her students years ago. The same park where she first met Keaton at the community fair. She hadn't been back since everything happened. Returning stirred a mix of emotion. But this time, she wasn't coming as someone's wife or caregiver. She was coming as Miss Moore, her student's favorite teacher. Kids ran around with small shovels, laughing, bumping into each other on purpose, calling her name every 2 minutes. The morning sun warmed the grass, and the breeze carried the smell of fresh soil and hibiscus flowers. Keshia knelt beside a little girl named Serenity, helping her press the earth around a sapling. "Ms. Moore, is this tree really going to grow tall?" the girl asked. "It will," Keshia smiled. "It just needs time, a little care, and a whole lot of patience." The words hit her unexpectedly. They weren't just about the tree. They were about her. As the children scampered off to get more mulch, Keshia stood up, brushed dirt from her jeans, and took in the scene around her. Families, volunteers, teachers. It felt warm, communal, lively. A feeling she had missed more than she realized. For the first time in a long while, she felt genuinely at peace. Meeting Daniel, not a love story, just hope. While handing out bottles of water to her students, she noticed a man standing near the registration tent. He wore a volunteer badge and a soft smile, observing the kids with genuine amusement. He looked familiar, not because she knew him personally, but because she recognized the look of someone who was comfortable in his skin. He walked over, hands in his pockets, and gestured toward the saplings. "These kids planted those faster than I've seen most adults do," he joked. Keshia laughed lightly. "They've been excited about this for weeks. Told them it's their chance to leave something beautiful for the community." "That's a great lesson," he said. "I'm Daniel, by the way. I volunteer with the school wellness program." She nodded. "I'm Keshia, 3rd grade teacher." There was no spark, no cinematic slow motion, no sudden butterflies, but there was something else. Comfort, ease, a softness she hadn't felt around a stranger in years. They talked briefly, about the kids, about school programs, about ways to support families going through hard times. Daniel spoke with understanding, not pity. When he mentioned he worked as a counselor, it made sense. Everything about him felt calm, grounded. As the event wrapped up, he pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to her. "Not for anything formal," he said with a warm nod. "Just if you ever want to collaborate on a wellness activity or grab some coffee." Keshia hesitated for a heartbeat, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being seen as a person, not a caregiver. She smiled. "Coffee sounds nice. Maybe next week." He returned the smile, sincere and simple. "I'd like that. No pressure. No expectations. Just a moment of hope." Moral lessons narration. Driving home later, Keshia rolled her windows down and let the warm Miami air sweep through the car. She replayed the morning in her head, not because anything dramatic happened, but because it marked an emotional shift. Her story was never just about betrayal. It was about rediscovery. The lessons she carried with her were carved deeply now, steady as the roots of the trees her students had planted. 1. Love is meaningful only when it's honest. She once gave everything to someone who hid behind lies. Now she knew that true love required open eyes, not blind devotion. 2. Caregiving is noble, but losing yourself is not. She learned the hard way that supporting someone should never require sacrificing your identity. 3. Walking away takes courage, sometimes more than staying. Leaving Keaton was the hardest decision she ever made, but it saved her life in ways she only understood later. 4. Healing is slow but powerful. It showed up in therapy sessions, journal pages, morning routines, and quiet nights at home, where she didn't feel lonely anymore, just free. Her past would always be part of her, but it no longer controlled her direction. Final reflection, Keshia's piece. That evening, she sat on her parents' back porch with a cup of tea and her journal open. The sky was a soft blend of orange and lavender, and the neighborhood kids played in the distance. She wrote, "I survived losing myself. I survived loving someone who didn't know how to love me back, and that version of me deserves joy, honesty, and peace." She closed the journal, leaned back in her chair, and breathed in deeply. Life didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. She didn't need a new relationship to feel whole. The next chapter of her life was hers alone to write, and for the first time in years, Keshia felt ready.